Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to an insight into destination crisis communications in the digital era. This is a 45-minute session, and we hope to help destinations and tourism organisations gain a better understanding of crisis communications. So there'll be a quick introduction by myself, and I'll introduce the panel, and then we'll have some good questions, and then take it to the audience. Anyone online can send in their questions on slido.com as well. So I'd like to thank the panel for coming and the audience as well, firstly. So in a digital era, crisis communications within the tourism sector has changed, becoming much more multi-layered, from hackers taking data, a media sting, or a social media outbreak. For example, a tweet from a discontent customer or the poor handling of a natural disaster has the potential to become a huge embarrassment. Poor communication management of an incident can place an organisation on the back foot of a problem and quickly damage reputations. How well a destination is equipped to respond to a crisis can often affect future visitor numbers and long-term reputation, therefore having a catastrophic effect. Crisis communications management must be structured. An internal strategy, regular training, auditing and preparation are key for PRs. Pre-written press releases, a planned response team, a chosen leader, and knowledge of which external partners to assist. These are all things that should be considered well in advance. So to discuss how PRs and tourism leaders should be prepared and how they can best avoid a major mishap, I'm delighted to welcome our excellent panel today. We have Dr. Abid Alibhat, the Managing Director of Jordan Tourism, whose role is leading the destination's positioning and promoting the country. This often means the importance of managing reputations. We have Hugh Riley, the Secretary General of a Caribbean tourism organisation. Hugh started in marketing communications at McCann Erickson Advertising not too long ago. He now leads the Caribbean to be a desirable year-round destination. Hugh is also a trained BBC broadcaster, which I'm sure comes in handy when dealing with the media. We have Nikki White, Director of Destinations and Sustainability at ABTA. Nikki works closely with destinations and tour operators. Part of this entails crisis management. Nikki chairs a number of committees with tourism. She also sits on the WT Advisory Council. So any issues with the WTM this morning, I'm sure Nikki, you have a chat with Nikki later. And
you can tweet them.
Or tweet Nikki as well. What's your Twitter handle?
Yeah.
I'm
not giving that away now.
Right, perfect for crisis. And finally, we have Chris Fair, the CEO of Renaissance Consultancy, which is a leading tourism consultancy providing a range of services, including place, brand management, and strategic consultation. Chris studied journalism before moving to the other side and co-founding a PR agency for early in your career before moving on to consultation. Finally, I'm Frank Marr. I am the PRCA Travel and Tourism Chairman and the co-founder of Amar and Associates, a PR agency based in London and Scotland. We provide tourism PR, crisis communication strategies for a range of tourism organisations, from internal training and strategic responses like social media and pre-written press releases. So we'll start quickly with each panel. We've got about 4 minutes to give us your introduction, your thoughts on crisis communications, your experience, and how you've had to deal with different situations. So we'll start with you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. Talking about Jordan in my capacity as Managing Director of Jordan Tourism Board, our situation a little bit different. I think it's a unique situation that Jordan location between these countries that have some political problems. And always I keep saying that we are the calm house between the noisy neighbors. So it is really challenging to changing the perception of the tourists, because we used to have a lot of tourists since in the 90s and the beginning of let's say 2010, we received 1 million visitors to Petra. But after the Arab Spring and what happened in these countries, the tourists start decreasing because they are maybe afraid from the destination. So it was a challenge for us how to communicate this, how to change and to convey the right message about the country. And it is part of the perception management at that time. It was really a challenge for us how to handle this issue, how to convince the tourists that Jordan is safe. There is nothing happening in Jordan. We proved that Jordan is safe, and the tourists still coming to the country, enjoying the experiences that we offer to our consumers. So directly you can't talk, obviously, that even the officials start talking about the country that is safe. This is an improper strategy. So we adopted a strategy where we invited a lot of media and journalists, and especially the influencers in social media. And they came to Jordan, and they shared their experience within their platforms, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and all these social media platforms. And they just convey the right message about the country. They encourage people that Jordan is will as a oasis of peace, and this is the people there and the authenticity of the country. Other thing, indirectly, we hosted a lot of international events, like Andrea Bocelli performed in Jordan, Enrique Iglesias. We have the Women Under 17 World Cup took place in Jordan. A lot of international events happened in Jordan. The conferences like the IMF and the WEF took place in Jordan. This is indirect message to the world that Jordan is safe. Another thing, the role of His Majesty and the Queen Rania, they played a major role to change the perception. And you know, the political role that Jordan is doing now in the region as a peace keepers. We are peacekeepers in the area, representing the moderate part, or keeping our eyes on the area to make sure that the peace process in the right track. So all these helped Jordan and Jordan Tourism Board to change the perception. And this reflects now in the numbers of this year. We witnessed an increase by the numbers of the tourists. I'm really happy to see that now Petra, it's full. There's no even single room in Petra now. September, October, November, December, it's fully booked, Petra.
So utilizing the media to create a positive light.
Yes. So the positive message that I can say that it's a user-generated content.
Okay.
That helped us a lot to overcome the misperception about the country.
Okay, excellent. And then Hugh, your experience with crisis communications?
Thank you, Frank. Well, first and foremost, the Caribbean Tourism Organization is the tourism development entity for the Caribbean. So we don't represent a single destination, but we represent a group of destinations, which are French-speaking, Dutch, English, Spanish, big islands, small islands, not islands at all. So it's a variety of tourism product within the Caribbean region. We use the theme, I suppose you could call it, one sea, one voice, one Caribbean. And that creates an interesting dilemma for us. Because people get the impression from the theme that we are one Caribbean, it is very easy to assume that whatever affects one of our islands affects all. So the first part of the crisis that we have to manage, evolving out of the biggest crisis that we've had in a long time, which is these massive hurricanes. Everybody in the room knows that hurricanes Irma and Maria, which affected some of the Caribbean several weeks ago in September, those created a massive challenge for our region. First and foremost, there were about a dozen of our islands that got damaged in one way or another to a greater or lesser extent. And the rest of the Caribbean was completely untouched. So we've got about 25 or 30% of the product that's affected by the hurricanes, but 100% of the product could possibly be through an unintended impact could be collateral damage. So the part of the crisis that we had to deal with very sensitively was helping our various publics, the trade and consumer publics, to understand the geography of the Caribbean, the spatial relationships from one country to another, and to help them to understand that even though we say we're one sea, one voice, one Caribbean, one has to understand that it doesn't mean that what affects one country affects all. A good example would be the Bahamas, which did sustain some damage from the hurricanes, particularly in the southern Bahamas, where Ragged Island was evacuated and sustained some damage. But that's in the southern Bahamas, and the Bahamas occupies a land area of about 100,000 square miles. So something that happens in the southern Bahamas in one of the islands has, in all probability, no effect whatsoever on something that goes on in Nassau.
Yeah.
So getting that point across in a sensitive way was, of course, a part of our managing that communication crisis. No matter how well organized your country is, something is going to happen any day. So the other part of managing a crisis is how do we lead the communication process as the tourism entity? So if something happens, if an incident of crime occurs perhaps in one of our member countries, you can pretty much expect that an investigative reporter will have the assignment to call the CTO and connect up the dots and ask questions about what might have happened in some other island, because he or she is now working on an assignment to prove that there is a crime wave across the Caribbean. So the crisis that we have is making sure that we communicate sensitively and truthfully what's happened, but we do so in a way that will help people to find the right information without panicking them. So we have a head of communications whose job it is to make sure that accurate updates are always posted on our website.
So your communication network is key to educating the public, ensuring that you have a good network.
Educating the public and doing so in a way that I sometimes put it this way: we steal a line from the advertising agency business, which says truth well told.
Yeah.
It has to be the truth. It has to be factual.
Absolutely.
But we make sure that we communicate it. And look, you can communicate the truth in a way that will assure people and give them confidence, and to use your word, educate them, or you can communicate it in a way that will panic them and put them into terror. So the truth, but well told, is our responsibility.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Hugh. And Nikki?
Thank you, Frank. And thank you. I'll come back again. So just again to position our role, I'm going to have to stay facing this one, so I can't move my head. ABTA is very much about coordinating the travel industry in the UK. So our members are actually tour operators, travel agents, the cruise lines, and we're trying to provide that central pivot role when a crisis happens, or even pre-crisis, so that we are helping then to communicate a message out to the consumers and to our members with one common voice across the travel industry in the UK, which can be challenging, but it's so important that we try and do that as soon as something is appearing as a crisis. So we have a comms team within ABTA itself, and generally we are seen as the voice of travel. So we'll straight away have the national media, broadcast media onto us, wanting for a position about what the UK travel industry are doing. So for us, it's really important to quickly get information from the destinations that we can actually share with our members, so that helps inform their policies and procedures as well. So as much as possible, we can have a coordinated approach from the UK. And the reason that is that we want consumers to understand a straightforward message about an issue happening. What we don't want is to create lots more consumer confusion by having various different reactions, different messages out there. So it is a large part of said industry coordination. It does come down to what the crisis is. I think we use this word crisis now an awful lot, and it's so variable now. I mean, you could say actually we've been in crisis mode all year this year with all the things happening. If you think from political crisis to natural disasters, health, security, there is something going on all the time.
Do you categorise each crisis, such as natural disaster, political turmoil, or anything like that?
It's not so much that we categorise them, but we see a different consumer reaction depending on the type of crisis that it is. So quite often, actually, political crises as such, whilst they might be in the media and might have a big impact, they don't necessarily change people's travel plans in the same way that a natural disaster will do.
Yeah.
Part of what it is all about is actually communicating the right kind of information. So we've seen recently with what's going on with the Catalan and Spain, that getting accurate information out when there is a political crisis going on helps to calm down some of the messages. And we need the support of the destinations to be doing their piece as well, because if there's a void of information coming from a destination during a crisis like that, the media, as we know, will fill in some of those gaps from lack of information. So making sure that we are getting up-to-date information to help the destinations protect their reputations as well. So that's what helps our comms team, and when they're asked questions, but behind the scene, my team are working with the destinations to get the messages there and to feed those out to the travel industry. So to really help make sure that we can have a sort of joined up approach across the industry.
Do you feel you're the bridge between the tour operator and the destination?
Yes, because I think the last thing the destinations want are 1,200 different members all asking the same question. So we can provide that facility where we have one point of contact for the destination and push it out widely across the industry.
So would you say ABTA is the ready spokesperson when a crisis occurs for tour operators?
If it is something that affects the whole industry or more than a couple of members, then yes. If it's one member and it's their individual crisis, then no. But if it's something that is broader, then ABTA tends to be the voice that people want to come and hear from.
Okay, excellent. And then finally we have Chris and your thoughts on crisis communications.
Thanks, Frank. We come at it from a slightly different perspective. At Resonance Consultancy, we're focused on advising tourism organizations and destinations around organizational business planning, tourism master planning, strategic plans. So as we think about plans for destinations and organizations, we're deeply looking at the product in terms of trying to understand what is the experiential quality of the destination. But then as you think about crises, we're looking at what might upset that balance or that perception. And as Nikki touched on, we really look at 4 particular areas, whether that's around natural disasters or particular events, or whether it's around health, public safety. But more and more, I think one of the key areas that we're focusing on is the political crisis. As you mentioned, that we're seeing that more and more for tourism organizations.
Do you have any examples of that where you've seen a political crisis and you've had to manage that?
Sure. I think a good example a couple of years ago was the state of Indiana in the United States, government passing a Freedom of Religion Act that was largely interpreted as a license to discriminate against gay and lesbian communities. And that's the type of a crisis where a tourism organization has to take a front row in terms of managing that and articulating positioning and policy and championing around that other organizations. As opposed to a national disaster where you're more disseminating information, this is an opportunity where a destination marketing organization or a tourism authority can play a strong role in advocating for or against particular policy.
How did Indianapolis, how did they overcome that?
Within the first 2 months, they were able to have that legislation repealed after several CEOs of Fortune 500 companies had signed on.
That was tourism lobbying or just overall state lobbying?
Sorry?
To change it, to stop it being...
To eliminate the law altogether because of what that did to the external perception of Indianapolis as a place for meetings, conventions, as an open society that was welcoming to all.
Okay. Excellent. So we're now going to some questions. If anyone does have any questions, I can see some appearing. We'll ask them at the end with the audience. Dr. Alibat, how is Jordan prepared should there be a sudden problem within a destination? What internal training do you have in place? And how does the tourism board work with partners? So 3 questions there.
Yeah, it's 3 questions. I will start from the last question. I think educating the sector is very important, how to deal if you have a crisis or you have an accident. So part of our policy as Jordan Tourism Board, we have members. They are the hotels, the tour operators, all the supply chain that dealing with the tourism sector. We conduct plenty of workshops and training courses how to handle or to deal with the crisis accidents. And if you go to the UNWTO crisis management manual, it is explaining, it is obvious, it's very clear in the manual, different examples how to deal with crisis. So we brought consultants from UNWTO, and we conduct these training courses and workshops to the sector if thing will happen.
How often do you do these workshops? Is it a yearly thing or?
It is, yes, it's a yearly thing, because there's some updates, especially that, you know, if you look into the manual, there is certain incidents that's not included in the manual, like, you know, the perception. You know, the people, they think that it is dangerous to go there, and they have some thoughts or concerns to travel to a certain destinations. So there is a new perception management manual to deal with these things. On the other hand, within JTB, we changed the org structure, and we changed our strategy.
Yeah.
So to deal with these events, especially that it is a challenge.
When did you change your strategy?
Last year. Last year, we had. I can say that it's a demand-driven approach.
Yeah.
We used to focus on the markets. We have like MBRs, marketing-based representatives in different countries, and just we focus on market Jordan and on each country. But now we identified our products and the experiences that we have in Jordan, which is 5 main experiences, and we start a demand-driven approach across the board to market Jordan.
So you have a team of 5 who are ready to respond to a crisis.
Of course, and we have a team for the social media and the communications and media marketing that on top of everything, so they can react if anything happens. Until now, we didn't. Thanks God, we didn't went through any crucial accident to communicate, but we know how to handle it if it happens.
And you're the designated leader for a crisis, or who typically leads issues statements?
You know, in the Jordanian government, you have the official spokesman who usually come up with the formal statement, and then the tourism board will send a letter or content to our database, which is the tour operators, marketing-based representative, just to communicate the truth, as my colleague here said. You have to be very clear about about the.
So you have a ready internal infrastructure of newsletter communications. Hugh, during recent hurricanes in the Caribbean, your organisation was inundated with inquiries from tourists on social media. This compiled with constant need for information from the media. How did you effectively deal with the high volumes of inquiries, and how did your structure within your team, how did the team absorb the pressure?
You have to manage the process, and you have to expect that people will be calling, and they'll call when they want to. Their deadline is their deadline, and you have to try and meet that as best you can. So there is a constant barrage, but it has to be managed. So we have, like everybody else, a manual, and we have a system, and our communications specialist manages that process for us. One of the things that he is religious about is helping us to understand throughout our whole system who the spokespersons ought to be.
Yeah.
That's critical. So within the CTO, it's fairly clear who the spokespersons are, but we also, and he teaches this, we make sure that our member countries understand who the spokespersons are as well. Why is that critical? Because a clever reporter can get a story out of a receptionist. So he or she calls up, and before they even ask for the official spokesperson, the CEO or whoever else, they're chatting with the receptionist. So I'm so sorry to hear what happened in you. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from XYZ Island. Oh, it's so terrible. How's your family doing? Oh, they haven't eaten in 3 days. This headline could come out. CTO spokesperson says, Caribbean in starvation mode. I mean, so the point is, and that's a little extreme, but the point is that you have to be clear that your whole staff understands how to deal with that call that comes from the reporter and who the spokespersons are. The other quick point that we've made about the whole how to handle the media in the crisis thing is that Even when the spokespersons are senior people within the organizations or within the destinations, you have to pay attention to credibility. There are some circumstances where tourism officials have very little credibility because the temptation of the tourism official is to say, everything is okay, come on down. But you are not an expert on all things. If it's a crime that's happened, put the law enforcement people on. Let them assure the public the matter is under investigation, we've apprehended someone, whatever the situation is. If the tourism authority is saying that, it has far less credibility because he is not an expert on crime. So I'm saying all that to say that you have to handle the media requests with great sensitivity and with immediacy. You cannot ignore them, but you cannot step outside of the lines of your area of responsibility or your expertise because then you destroy the credibility. The right spokesperson has to be channeled to give the answers.
Factual statements, very important. I have a question for Nikki, but we'll quickly go on to Chris at the end first. What's the biggest misinformation or the biggest area of mismanagement you've experienced when dealing with a crisis communication?
I think most often it's not having a plan in place to begin with. So crisis communications ends up being reactive and rather than having been well thought out and off strategy. So, but it's not just, as we think about crisis communications, it's not just the external of having that spokesperson or that voice. To Hugh's point, it's also the capacity within the organization to communicate with the other authorities or agencies that are largely frontline and responsible for whatever that crisis might be. As Hugh said, too often it could be a grave error to have somebody speaking from a tourism perspective about public safety or health and welfare. That's not really the role of the tourism board. So it's important to have, as we think about capacities within the organization and designing that for a tourism board, of who is that person, whether it's vice president, community relations, government relations, but it's really a two-way street, that this crisis communications too often is just looked at as how we're talking to the public without thinking about what are the linkages that we're building within our organization to those other agencies that need to be part of the answer.
Yeah, ensuring there's infrastructure in the first place. Okay, Nikki, earlier this year, the ABTA website was hacked. So it's starting to occur a lot more. Tourism organisations having data stolen and so on. It can often start from a small hotel and have a snowball effect. How would you recommend organisations best deal with hackers and breaches of internal data? And how did ABTA go about resolving their website being hacked?
It's definitely out of my comfort zone, and I think it was out of a lot of people's comfort zone dealing with a data breach. I think when you're talking about crisis management, this is something really new which people are having to now face, and it's happening regularly. And I think what's so important is communicating accurately, and there's a small crisis happening there, communicating accurately and at the right times when you know the right sort of information. Because people want to know what you've done, what's potentially happened with the data, what you're doing about it, and offering the right steps in place. So for us, I have to say, one of the most important things is having cyber insurance, because there's a wealth of people, once you've got cyber insurance, that are in place to help you actually manage a situation like this. And a lot of people, I would say, still don't have the experience of handling such a situation and of knowing what processes you need to put in place.
What did the cyber insurance, how did they help you out?
Basically, it brought in lots of different experts to help us analyse, because, I mean, we were told that there'd been a hack, but actually, how do you know that? You have to establish the facts first and actually get someone to check what you're being told. So that was one of the key things, first of all, is actually understand what the real situation is, because it's easier to react very quickly and think, okay, this is a crisis, but if you don't actually know, has it genuinely been taken or is this just a threat? You have to understand the situation you're dealing with and then build from that. So the data experts there that help with that. A lot of people kicking behind the scenes to help you with such an incident. And then it's really focused on the messaging that you put out. So analysing who's actually been affected, making sure that you're communicating to those groups and really not hiding anything. I think that's so important for people, and particularly with data. They want to know what steps you're taking. And I think, it was a very difficult event that we went through, and a lot of people learnt a lot very quickly around that issue. But it's also said understanding how to move swiftly with the right communications at the right time, because it is different to a natural disaster, it's different to political situations. And then making sure that once you know those facts, you get them out to the right audiences, so they know what action they should be taking as well.
So your key tips to destinations, cyber insurance, and having...
And actually knowing because a lot of these things are done with third parties, which are out of your control. So one of the most important things is actually looking at the contracts you have with your third-party data suppliers and sense checking that and doing resilience checks.
And dealing with lawyers and so on when data is breached.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. We have a quick question from Silo. So, Doctor, how has the communication crisis changed with the new generation of millennials, with social media and so on? How do we, and anyone else wants to answer this as well, how do we feel crisis communications has changed?
Yes, I think it's a good question these days in terms of the trends and the behavior of the social media and the travel in general. Social media now is playing a major role in the tourism industry. I'll give you an example. Last week, we hosted one of the top influencers from Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon and Palestine, and some of them from Europe, from Germany, Italy, and other European countries. And we created a hashtag called Amman24. It is Amman24. It's a new initiative where what you can do in Amman within 24 hours.
Yeah.
The full experience.
Yeah.
And we discovered that the hashtag should be Amman72 because of the experiences that you can do a lot. Many things you can do in Amman. But the idea behind that, the social media, the impressions reached to 50 million in one day. So it was trending, #1 trending hashtag in the region, in the United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Jordan.
Was the core target audience for the Middle East?
Actually, they are travelers, they are bloggers, vloggers, Instagrammers, active in the social media. But I didn't expect that this hashtag will reach to 50 million impressions. So when you put a positive message and you have this hashtag trending, it is maybe it could be a negative, by the way, negative or dangerous information about the destination, just sharing negative news. So you have to be careful and to be prepared how to manage and to monitor the content that sending positive messages about the destination and controlling and doing the media monitoring, social media monitoring, because social media now becoming a very dangerous tool in the hands of many people. Going back, I was always keep saying that, the negative news that people, or maybe we have it in Jordan, we call it the yellow pages, where they share fake news. I'm looking here on the screen. How you communicate or how you deal with the news on the social media, maybe the fake news. Before 4 years, maybe if you want to, the journalists come to your office, they want to have these ads in their newspaper, especially the online news. Nowadays, they depend heavily on the Google AdSense, where the Google AdSense now, they're controlling the websites. So they created the fake news because they need to generate more traffic to their websites. Maybe this will affect the tourism. Maybe it's communicating fake news because they want to be in a green or on the radar of Google, so they can put more ads on their websites. So we have to be careful to deal with this kind of let's say, pages when they publish fake news that affect the tourism or affect the reputation of their destination. Now, this is the role, I think, of the ministries of or the regulatory bodies of monitoring the media in each country.
Yeah, and contacts within Google to ensure that
Yes, of
you
course.
react to something fake.
Of course, yes.
I think that's an important point. That the hurricanes taught us a couple of really important things about the style of communication, the mode of communication, and how to actually reach people. The first thing that many of us, myself included, did not realize is that most cell phone towers are built to withstand Category 3 hurricanes.
Right, yeah.
So we had a 5. So the first thing that goes is that particularly important communication network.
Yeah.
How do you reach people if the cell phone communications get knocked out? The answer to that is that now they are creating stronger structures to withstand Hurricane 5, but 175, 185 mile an hour winds gusting to 205 miles an hour, that's pretty fierce. So that's the first thing that really needed to be attended to. But the second thing is that throughout the world now, and certainly in the Caribbean, there is this, I guess I will call it, phenomenon of the sharing economy.
Yeah.
So people are coming and staying in places that are non-traditional. So if you're accustomed to having all of your hotels in one particular area, so you know where all of your guests are staying, they're all there, that's easy enough to communicate. You've got your domestic your local population, you've got your visitor population, you have to evacuate them and so on. You have to communicate with them in a crisis. If now they are widely dispersed among your community and they're embedded in villages and far-flung places, communicating with them is a different kind of challenge than it used to be in the traditional accommodation sector. And so these are things that you learn as you go along, particularly in a natural disaster.
Have people changed the way they cope with things nowadays with millennials and the overuse of mobile telephones and so on?
Well, millennials don't have TV sets, or they don't know anybody that has a TV set. So you have to be, your message has to be communicated on mobile platforms. And millennials tend to be, generally speaking, fairly unconventional in where they stay and what they do and so on. So yes, you have to find a way to find them and to communicate with them where they are. If your main form of communication is by, a PSA or on TV or an ad in a newspaper, you can forget it. They're not reading that.
So your social media messaging.
Social media is the platform.
Important. Okay. One last question for Nikki and Chris, and then we'll take it to the audience. Nikki and Chris, do you have any tips on best managing negative information on Google from unfair media attention?
In terms of monitoring information of reviews?
Yeah, monitoring and ensuring that it's not high up on the rankings for media information or something that has been, a media storm. For example, the Cadbury's cream, the Cadbury's egg. There was a chocolate firm, Cadbury's in the UK, and they did one advert without the Easter egg, and the press jumped on it, and they missed one word using Easter, and the press weren't happy that they'd abandoned the Christian word, but it was taken out of context by the media, and that ranked quite highly on the internet for some time until they were able to say, we missed a word in one place, and they issued lots of statements and did lots of social media. But do you have any examples of how, ABTA have had a few problems this year. How have you managed to ensure that your statements are ranking higher than newspaper?
It's getting things out quickly and regularly. I think not relying on just one channel, but you have to get lots of different communications out with the same message, but all those different touch points. And making sure, you are regularly doing it. So we will often send out updated statements. Even if there's not that much new, we will send something out almost every hour during a crisis so that people know it's under control and that there is that common, consistent message going out. I think we had this a few years ago where something appeared in one of the online newspapers very unexpectedly about an issue in a destination, serious flooding. We reacted to it, starting to put things in place, only to find out a bit later on it was actually an old news story from a few years beforehand, and somehow it had got back into the online publication. Yeah. And that in itself was causing a crisis, when actually it was completely inaccurate information. So we actually have a process now where we have to verify all the information still, because I think in this day and age with social media, it's very tempting to react to everything very quickly.
Do you have an order of statements, whether it's putting something out on social media first and then a statement, or do you typically analyse and then decide how you're going to react to
We
it?
try and get it across all the channels together.
Okay.
Because I think different audience are looking in different areas for their information.
Okay. And Chris, any final tips on managing media on Google at all?
I think to the point of the idea of just having press release as a mode of communication or official statement isn't sufficient. That now it is about looking at multi-channels of that consistent message being delivered, to your point, to multiple different audiences.
Okay, excellent. So thank you, everyone. Very well answered. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? We've got quite a few on slido.com. Okay, and is there a microphone in the audience? Bearing in mind for the Caribbean, you have a press conference, Hugh, today.
Yes. It's at 3 o'clock. The press
3 o'clock.
conference is at 3 o'clock. Am I allowed to make a brief commercial on that? It's North Gallery, room 5. Starts at 3 o'clock. That's our Caribbean Hurricane Recovery Update and Press Conference.
So, super specialist questions on the Caribbean, please.
Well, hopefully my question will be answered then, because mine was going to be about that, Turks and Caicos Islands, and I mentioned this in the press briefing earlier on today, in the fact that we've had lots and lots of poor publicity about how badly the Caribbean was affected by Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, and devastated, dreadful, and it's basically resulted in tourism being down, like for us, at 25%, for me and my golf club and hotels and things. But what we haven't had is the big press people come along and say, well, no, actually, you're now open for business. Everything is... Of course, there are islands that are very badly destroyed. Dominica, there's lots of places, Anguilla, that will take a lot of time to recover. But for instance, where I am, Turks and Caicos Islands, Grace Bay is open for business. What I'm trying to say is how do we get that message across, rather than everybody, because still everybody's saying, well, I'm not sure I'm going to go to the Caribbean because it's been so badly damaged. But unless we get these people back, unless we get these tourists back, we can't employ our housekeeping staff, we can't employ our gardeners, we can't employ everybody else to come and work for us because we don't have the tourists. So we can't actually develop the tourism because we haven't got the tourists coming back. I'm not 100% sure we're doing a really, really good job in the Caribbean saying, okay, there are some islands that you can go to. We're saying, rather than saying that the Caribbean collectively has been very badly damaged, there are places where we can get the tourists back, and I'd like that to be maybe addressed this afternoon or maybe addressed now.
It will be addressed this afternoon in some detail. The point is that you're absolutely right, no argument at all from us on that. We are doing the Open to Business campaign, but we're not doing nearly enough. It has to be accelerated, it has to be widespread, and it has to reach all publics. So the whole Open to Business message needs to be widespread, but we'll talk more about that. You're absolutely right. The whole region is going to be impacted unless we get that message out strongly.
Are you reaching out to partners as well, potential airlines and so on?
Social media, but one of the things I mentioned today was the big players were very happy to come down. The press were very happy to come down. The BBC were very happy to come down. ITV was happy. CNN came down. NBC, CBS. They all came down during the event, during the hurricane, and they said, oh, wow, it's devastated. But they're not happy now to come back and say, oh, 3 months after, how much work's everybody done? Because it's no longer newsworthy. People aren't... Obviously, there are people that have lost their homes. There are people without roofs. But generally, I can say on the Turks and Caicos, we've all worked incredibly hard to make sure the people with less are working hard.
We're quite tight on time, but come along to the press conference this afternoon. With someone here, do you have a question?
Hello. I was just wondering if when a crisis happens, does the standard communication have to stop? And if it doesn't, or if it does, how much time does it take to, renew a campaign? Or does it always have to be a new destination branding? when you go back out there to re-communicate on a more general scale?
I think it depends on the crisis, really, and how large. Often the crisis categories, it's often a media or social media storm, which often are not as bad as they make out. So it depends on the crisis, I think. What do you think?
If I can offer a comment on Tunisia, for example, Tunisia have actually been fantastic at maintaining communication with the trade in the industry through the few years where we haven't been able to travel to Tunisia. And I think keeping that recognition up for a destination is absolutely vital, because at some point destinations do come back on. So by having that consistent brand message is absolutely vital, and not having to completely reinvent yourself. Obviously, if there's a certain area that's off, you sometimes have to reinvent a particular area, and that's where we see some rebranding of areas happening. But generally, it's about having a consistent message, particularly to the trade, so that it's visible, so that when it comes back, it hasn't completely dropped off.
Doctor, have you had any experiences of having to suddenly put something on hold and restart it?
Actually, we didn't witness any critical, let's say, crisis to deal with. But from academic or theoretical parts that we had from our consultants that they came, I know your point of view that usually you need 21 days, actually, to be more specific, 21 days people to forget. Because the mass news on daily basis, if you look from yesterday until now, I was yesterday in the CNN event. Yeah. Every 5 minutes, you have the new breaking news. So, as I heard from the crisis management consultants, you need 21 days for a destination to recap again. And to do new branding, I don't agree with you, because they are already there. They invested millions of dollars in their brand and their presence. So maybe they need full-fledged, smart communication campaign to just to clarify and to bring the trust back to their destination.
I think sometimes a campaign might need to be readjusted slightly. And,
yes, maybe they can change maybe to add some music, maybe to change the motto.
Yeah.
It depends on the crisis.
Key message. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, hi, Tine Moore, Mindbrand. What do you do when a crisis affects you, which is not actually your crisis? For example, in Jordan, we know the whole region had a crisis, but not Jordan. Jordan is one of the safest countries I've been. Or in Caribbean, you were affected by Zika virus, where most of your places weren't actually affected by the Zika virus. I know APTA was doing great, for example, when Greece was badly affected by bad news in Britain about the shortage in shops and so on and so on. So what do you do? What do you do? Do you continue with your? Do you take this crisis communication on board? And you said, yeah, there is no Zika virus in Caribbean, or you just continue with positive PR and avoid the mentioning of the word?
You've got about 10 seconds.
Okay, 10 seconds. Truth, well told. Educate people, give them the facts, tell them how to protect themselves against Zika or whatever it is, but do not ever lie to them. Don't put them into a panic, but truth well told, and make sure that the right spokespersons are doing the talking. The easiest way to make a bad situation worse is to say the wrong thing, and the easiest way to say the wrong thing is to have the wrong spokesperson.
Excellent. Education and perception, yeah.
One of the worst things is to say nothing as well. I think it said not being honest, but actually saying nothing and keeping a void of information, because people then think you're hiding something as well. So getting something out, even said if it's not a crisis, keeping those messages out about what you're doing is just as important.
That even trickles down to the airlines, people flying into a region, and ensuring everybody's fully aware. Final word, Doctor, do you have any?
I think, just to answer the question, it says the situation in Jordan, I answered your question at the beginning of this session. It's a long process just to convince people that there's nothing happening in Jordan. It's part of our strategy for the perception management, that to convey the right message about the country, where you use the certain tools, the social media, the media itself, just to communicate the positive messages and to share the experience. Sorry, I catch a cold from London's weather.
Yeah. So
Because the weather in
different
Jordan is
temperature.
24.
Yeah, yeah.
It's nice weather in Jordan. It's very cold here.
You've got to wear a hat in London.
Sorry for that. But yeah, it's a matter of communication. But it will take maybe longer because you need to encourage and change the perception. This is the idea. And we succeeded in that.
It's a very broad topic.
Thank you.
It's too much to cover. But thank you very much for coming.
you.
And I'm sure you can speak to our wonderful panel at the end if anybody has any other questions. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.